So welcome everyone to today's Reverse Rett Bitesize session. These sessions are being sponsored by the Pairs Foundation. So we have a grant from the Pairs Foundation to put these Rett Connect programs on. The session will be recorded, as you know. And so if you're not comfortable with that, do turn your camera off. However, we do ask that if you've not yet shown yourself on camera, that you do show yourself on camera in the beginning, just so that we know that everyone here is human. And you can ask questions in the traditional way of, putting your hand up, but you can also write your questions into the chat box. If you do want to ask a question, or just throughout the session, if you keep yourself on mute, that's best, so that we don't have any sound interference. And then if you want to ask a question, you can unmute when you're invited. So on to today's session in particular. This session obviously is with Professor Santosh. Anyone who's familiar with the work of Reverse Rett, he won't need any introduction to you. We've been working with Professor Santosh now for 7 years. Initially, we provided a small amount of seed funding for Professor Santosh's clinical research on Rett syndrome, starting with the development of the tailored digital monitoring system through Health Tracker, which is specifically for children and adults with Rett syndrome. And I'm sure Professor Santosh will talk about that a little bit today. And then we moved on to supporting the first UK clinical trials for Rett syndrome, which obviously took place at King's. And then we've now moved on to core funding, the SIP Rett Centre, which is the UK's first clinical research and treatment centre for Rett syndrome. We have had a few other bite-sized sessions with Professor Santosh. I should give him a proper introduction to say that you're a clinical psychopharmacologist, psychiatrist. You've got the longest signature on your emails that I've ever seen from anyone I've ever known. But predominantly your work, as far as will interest everyone today, is through the CIPPRD, which is the Centre for Interventional Pediatric Pharmacology and Rare Diseases. And so that covers obviously a lot of different conditions and children and young adults with lots of different conditions. And you have a very broad experience and publication list with all different kinds of conditions. And I personally feel very lucky that we've managed to draw you in further into the Rett field, although I don't know if it was really us drawing you in rather than you sort of finding windows through which you could dive into helping as much as you can with these patients. So obviously we've had a few other bite-sized sessions with Professor Santosh, as I've said, where they've spoken more broadly about the work of the SIP Rett Centre, but today we're focusing on the SIP Rett team's experience of running clinical trials, discussing the benefits of taking part in clinical research, and just really what they've learned from working with this population on clinical trials and what we have to look forward to in the future. So Professor Santosh, thank you so much for giving us your time today, and it's now over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. First of all, what I want to say is that even though it was to do with clinical trials and so on, I'm going to be focusing on what we did and what we do in the center and what we've learned so far, and then weave it into the thing about context of research and clinical trials, partly to do with the fact that because the Cerestan trial has not been published, I wouldn't be in a position to talk about things which have not yet been thing, and similarly the GW Pharma one has not been thing, and the Anavex one hasn't. So because as clinical scientists, when we have to sign documents, there's limited things that we can actually reveal without it being in the public domain after publication. So that's the reason why. But what I'm going to do is weave in all the different reasons why it might be useful to participate in research with the center and register with the center. So I'm just going to try and share my screen. So what I've sort of labeled it as participating in clinical research and getting clinical needs met, because that is very practical. so that it's not just to do with doing a clinical trial or something like that, but actually by doing so, the clinical needs are actually met of the individual concerned. So that's really how I'm going to be talking about it. And first of all, I needed to discuss that our method of optimal care is it's patient-centered, it's shared decision making, and actually our aim is to improve clinical outcomes and user satisfaction. And this has been the theme right through setting up the center and working with yourselves to be able to actually get the best outcome for individuals. And this is a very old slide. I just wanted to highlight here that what happens technically is that, when in Rett syndrome, when someone is born, you have this so-called normal development initially, but then after that, there's some stagnation and regression, especially in terms of microcephaly, and so on. And then you have autistic features starting to come in. And then you have the respiratory, the autonomic, the cognitive, anxiety, seizures, and Parkinsonian features. And so what I wanted to really highlight is that the ones in red are the ones that you can actually make some impact on in terms of interventions, because by the time they come to us, and it just so happens that all of these features in here are the things that we are actually having to deal with right now in the center. So this is a slide that is completely different from what it was, but it actually shows you that what we are doing as a center is focused on exactly this. And this is what we are actually having to focus our research on as well. So how are we actually trying to get research data at the same time when we're providing clinical care? What we're really doing is that we're collecting information using wearables to be able to get physiological data from individuals. We're collecting information from web-based questionnaires, which are using the Health Tracker platform. Now, more recently, we've started doing pharmacogenomics in individuals so that we can actually collect data on why certain individuals respond to medicines in a particular fashion. And then we've got the clinical assessment, and all of that put together is what we are intending to look at in terms of big data and trying to get to understand using machine learning techniques or artificial intelligence techniques to start looking at what type of symptoms respond and can be predicted before it actually happens. So that's really the context. So what the participation and what we expect from families are actually quite simple. We are talking about families being able to register with the center, being able to do online questionnaires, and we've made sure that the burden of doing questionnaires will not be more than around 30 minutes a month maximum. And that too, we are not expecting it to be done at that frequency. So we're really not talking about a lot of time being spent doing that online, but actually providing us with that information online will make a huge difference. I'm hoping to show you the results from some of the things to tell us exactly how we can actually improve the knowledge underpinning about the condition, but also how we can actually do something about it. And so taking that into account, and it's in terms of pharmacogenomics is just simply a cheek swab, which we get the laboratory to send it through to you. You just get a cheek swab and you send it back to us, and then we actually collect the whole thing. And this is this is something that we are doing without us having the funding for it. I've been trying to get some funding through some other sources for it, but it actually allows us then to get the largest bandwidth of understanding what enzymes are affected in children or individuals with Rett syndrome, which might affect medication metabolism, which means that it can tell us whether an anti-epileptic or anti-reflux medicine or an antipsychotic or an antidepressant, it doesn't matter. We are talking about the broadest possible screening that we are doing. So we are not focusing on your neuropsychiatric symptoms. We're talking about all medicines. And I think that allows us to then use that information the longer term to start practicing, using that information to make decisions about which medicine might be best for whom. So that's the other information that we're now starting to collect within the center. So the other thing, of course, is to do with sending the watches out and asking you all to use the watch, put the watch on for around 48 hours. 2 nights, 2 days is what we would like to get the data on so that we can actually have that information that allows us to start understanding individuals better and providing the care we can and optimizing it. So what the maximum that we would be asking from you is, letting us have wearable-based recordings, which is not painful. It's nothing. It's just simply putting it under the wrist, onto the ankle, and just simply collecting it, sending it back to us, and we will do the analysis. That's about physiology. Especially, it allows us to understand about autonomic function. The second is about doing some questionnaires online, and especially there's a short questionnaire which is just takes you 5 minutes to do, which is always going to be available to you on the health tracker, which allows you to go and complete it when you think you want to let us know something that has changed, that you think you want help, that if you did that, and if it reaches the threshold, we will get an alert automatically, and the clinician will contact you. So we've even done that. And it's just a 5-minute questionnaire. So it is not a long questionnaire. It is a very simple questionnaire to do, so that whenever you feel that there is something that is major, that has changed or shifted, you want to let us know, you just complete that questionnaire. So that's the second. And then the third one is the cheek swab. So and then when it comes to, if it's to do with ECGs and so on, for those with higher risk in terms of things, we are then trying to look at more detailed analysis of ECGs and so on, and that will be at an individual level. So those are the kinds of things, data that we're talking about, collecting as part of routine clinical care, which actually will help us immensely to understand the condition better, and also to stratify risk and reduce the risk for the individuals as such. And having this data will allow us to be able to identify which clinical trial, might be best for whom. Because if there's a molecule that helps with seizures as a focus, if we knew who are the ones who've got uncontrolled seizures, we'd be able to contact the right people to be able to request that they participate in the trial. Or if there's someone who's got breathing difficulties are the main issues, we'd be able to contact that particular group of individuals because we'd have the data already with us. So that's really the logic about getting information routinely, and so that we can actually use that to improve understanding as well as care. So this is the kind of thing that we will be looking at. So this is when we're talking about it, we've got the genetic abnormality, we've got learning disability, we've got ASD, we've got this dystonia, epilepsy, emotional dysregulation, behavioral dysregulation, the autonomic dysregulation. Then we've got gastrointestinal, where it is to do with nutrition, gastric reflux, constipation. Then you've got spine mobility, endocrine difficulties, respiratory, cardiac, and of course, allergies and medication side effects, which we actually can look at and look at drug-drug interactions, try and reduce the risk for individuals, and so on and so forth. So there's a large number of things that we as a center have been trying to look at and help. And this is something that we are now doing, which is to do with a very structured medication review that allows us to actually look at medicines as to what has happened with each symptom, whether it's to do with dystonia, whether it's to do with obsession, whether it's to do with repetitive behavior, whether it's to do with cardiac problem, and so on. So each molecule that we start, the clinicians are actually doing a detailed assessment in the background using the health tracker, which allows us to then identify whether the molecule is doing what it's supposed to do, and are there any side effects that are associated with it. And which then means that that information would allow us to look at it and say, can we optimize and personalize the care? Can we stratify the person by risk? So we know that there are certain molecules that are poor responders. We can anticipate side effects, because if they've ended up with side effects of, let's say, drowsiness with 2 different molecules, when we're using the third molecule, we have to be actually identifying a molecule that is less likely to produce drowsiness as a side effect. In terms of the most important thing, I think, which is important in this particular group, is that to be able to stop ineffective treatments. Because oftentimes all that one is doing is that we are keeping on adding medicines, but we are never questioning should someone continue on that or not. So that is the other aspect of it that we have to do. And then also reducing the drug-drug interactions, because we can identify from this as to what medicines are there and so on. And then the other thing in terms of cost savings as well, because in terms of service delivery, there's reduced patient burden. If you don't have to take, if you're someone is taking 6 medicines and you actually can bring it down to 4 with actually not making too much of a change in the thing, and actually you can improve the side effects, reduce the side effects, you've actually improved the quality of life by just removing stuff rather than having to do anything much more than that. And of course, it will allow us to do with, learn from response patterns. And then all of this can be used in artificial intelligence algorithms to be able to learn and do more for the children. So this is an example of what the team does in a single patient we've looked at. And this is all of the contacts we've had for one patient. And so this is just to say there's one clinician, there was a letter done, 3 clinicians involved here, then who the person was, who was involved, how long was it taking for their contact and so on. And this is, I'm just continuing to show you for one patient, this is the number of contacts we've had to have as a center. So 3 slides just for one patient. And so it depends on what is needed. We are able to deliver it. And some individuals who are stable, we may be doing it a little less frequently, but when there is a need, we are stepping in to do what is needed as such. And that's why trying to provide the care when it is necessary and what is necessary, and trying to get that into account. So this is the 5-minute question I was talking about, where it contains issues around respiratory symptoms, autonomic, neuromuscular, motor, and emotional behavioral as such. These are just simply single items that you that goes through. You just have to tick and say whether what's happening, and that should take no more than thing. But what happens is that we've got an inbuilt algorithm here in the system that as soon as something is really vital or probably dangerous or risky, the clinician is actually sent an email to say that this particular person has completed this, there's something that looks unusual, do you want to have a look at it and see whether there is, contact the person to see whether there's something needs to be done. So this questionnaire is available to every person once you're registered. It's always available on the system. You just have to go into the system and complete it. So that then allows us to capture what's happening at that point in time. So this is to just show you what a particular thing, if it is done on multiple times, you can actually track and see what symptoms are changing across time. And that allows you to actually look at who needs what and what might have been done, what's happening when something has gone bad, and so on and so forth. So that's to do with patient symptoms and so on. Now it's to do with the parent carer profile itself. And here what happens is that it tells you there's a questionnaire which we ask families to complete probably once every 6 months or so, which should not take very long to do. But this is just about 10 items to be about how it is affecting carers and parents in terms of their own physical health, family's health, how it's affecting relationship, how it's affecting study and work, social life, all of those things, so that we can actually then look at it and see whether there is the burden is too much, and then the psychologist can actually step in to assist if needed. And the other aspect of it is that we had also looked at when during COVID, during lockdown, we'd actually got information from families about the impact on parental anxiety and so on. And here, when it was to do with about being nervous, tense, anxious, worried about it. And it's understandable because at that time we didn't know enough about the condition. But what you can see is that during the first lockdown, how many of the parents were anxious. Second lockdown, the numbers are smaller in the second lockdown that we've got. But what is really striking for us is the difference between the numbers when we are looking at it in terms of the other patients we see in the clinic. So they are much the same as such in terms of experiencing, worrying about what's happening. So in other words, chronic illness itself, especially in the context of when you're vulnerable, parents and family members will feel worried because you don't know what's happening, especially in the initial phase of the lockdown. But when you then go on to looking at it from the perspective of, what's happening in terms of sadness and, emotionally exhausted, these are all features we're capturing in the questionnaire. But what I wanted to say is that we are now looking at developing an algorithm for this, so that when someone completes things about the parental burden and how they're feeling, and anxiety and depression, that can trigger an automatic email to the psychologist to be able to then contact the family in real time. So that is the other aspect of it. So we are, looking to automate this so that we can actually get that, because all of these things take time, but we have now come up with the algorithm and we are going to implement it. And when it's done, we'll let you know, because we want to create a 2-minute questionnaire which families can complete at any time. So that just like the 5-minute questionnaire for the symptoms for the child, for the patient, for the family, we want to create a 2-minute questionnaire where, so that when they are in dire need, they can just complete that, and that should trigger a different kind of an alert. Okay, so those are the kinds of things that we are really looking at, and this is just to say that families are happy with what they're doing. We've got lots of things, and we're very grateful for how people have been giving feedback and so on. And now coming to the research side of things, what I wanted to first say is that this is based on all the patients in the clinic. We are showing you the profile of the patients, average profile of patients coming through the clinic. And what you can see is that the motor symptoms are present in most of the patients who have problems in motor symptoms. But apart from that, what you can see is that when you are, the ones in red are the ones that we are targeting at the moment in the thing. So autonomic, respiratory symptoms, mental health, neurovascular, sleep, social communications cardiac symptoms, and so on. So it's not that the other symptoms don't matter, but as a center, where the kind of things that we can actually do in order to be able to help, and the other things in amber, that's to do with motor symptoms, neurological, gastrointestinal. What we're doing is we're trying to get the information packaged in a manner that allows the other specialists to be able to do what is needed. Because the biggest problem in medicine is how information is packaged and provided to the person who makes decisions. And that, I think, is what, as a team, we can actually do well, and we support families about it. Similarly, when you look at it, there's a second set. When we've looked at it, these are the types of problems that we've actually assisted in improving over time. And again, you can see it's to do with the same kind of symptoms. It's mental health, respiratory, autonomic, and sleep, and cardiac problems. This is to show you how we have used the watch data to be able to explore autonomic problems. And what you can see here is this is just an electrodermal activity thing, but you can see there are sudden bursts of very unusual patterns coming through. And this then allows us to know that this child has got an autonomic dysregulation, and we can then treat it. And when you just look at the child, there is no way of being able to pick up whether this exists or not. And so actually getting the physiological data allows us to be able to plan treatment in a more targeted fashion. And that is what we're going to do. And now we are going to be looking to see whether we can automate in the large data sets that we have, whether we can actually automate using an algorithm to be able to pick up children who've got certain patterns, which we can then target and focus on to see whether we can actually use certain treatments to be able to help. And that would be part and parcel of a research project and a trial, which could be done as an automated trial, which is remote trials. You don't have to come into the hospital and so on. These are existing molecules that are being used, and we would be looking at how we can do that in the future. But all of this, the reason I'm showing all of this is to try and help people understand that it is data that helps us manage the problems that individuals have. And so it's the data, and it's not about just research, because just research is like going into a clinical trial or something. But here, this is actually using real data to be able to change what happens to your child and when it is needed and how it needs to be done. That's really what this is about. And this again gives you an idea as to across time, when we've looked at the various kinds of problems that the children have had in the center, you can see that actually there is a reduction, especially in the emotional behavioral autonomic dysregulation symptomatology. And this is the group data. There's not one patient, this is all of the patients in the center together. And you can see that there is actually an improvement happening across time in the kind of targets where we are focusing on as such. This again is another thing which is it's unique, because we are the only group probably in the world who's actually tracked what happened during during COVID in the Rett population. And we've got, and these are to do with the number of times we got alerts, clinical alerts from the health tracker when people had completed the 5-minute questionnaire, specifically about fever and breathlessness. And what you can see is that the frequency of breathlessness got worse exactly at the time when we were expecting the general population as well. So this was breathlessness and fever peaking at that time. And so you can see that we could track this. And this meant that when we got the alert, we actually contacted the families and helped manage the situation so that the patients didn't end up in intensive care. And so that was the other aspect of getting data. So this was completely dependent on that 5-minute questionnaire being completed by families. And that when we get the data, then we can actually translate it into this and then look at how we can act on it. So then I'm just going to show you a few of the things that publications which are already been mentioned before, but I just want to highlight it again as to why this is important. This is how to, based on the physiological data we have, where we developed the first algorithm to be able to differentiate what happens in Rett syndrome girls versus girls with just autism. And to be able to use an algorithm to differentiate it, and we could differentiate almost all of them. It could be differentiated because of the pattern being different. But again, this is dependent on data. And so what we have to do is learn more about it and see how we can get better at this. This is a review that was done by Jatinder and the team as such. And again, here we were looking at it in terms of learning from autonomic dysfunction and sudden death in patients across the thing, and then how we can prevent it. And here, based on this, we came up with the model as to what are the different things like infection, seizures which spread to the brainstem, certain medicines that increase the QT interval, certain medicines that actually worsen respiratory depression, and then how all of that, when it comes together, and on top of that, when it leads to irregular breathing and breath holding, that's when all of this come together, that is when something dreadful can happen. And so what we are now doing is identifying each bits of this so that we can actually preempt the risk and therefore help manage the patients better. This is learning from another condition like pediatric brain injury and understanding how we can actually learn from that, managing acute injury and learning how to manage autonomic functions during that time. And again, this is not relevant, but just to say that we've actually summarized this into a single thing so that people can understand what needs to happen and why this is happening and so on. But the reason I'm showing these is that now our next phase is that we're converting all of these risk factors into questionnaires that we would then be hoping we can get clinicians and families to complete so that on an annual basis, so that we can actually start using it to stratify patients by risk that they pose to themselves, so that and this is the other thing in terms of when you've got seizures, what are the risk factors? So it's to do with epilepsy, seizures, and sudden death. And then lastly, most recently, what we've done is we've focused on dystonia because we're keeping on getting feedback that abnormal movement disorders were one of the biggest problems in the group. So we've just got this published. We just corrected the document, the PDF, so it should be out in this week or so. And here what we've done is we've gone into great details of understanding how the different kinds of movement disorders happen, which is to do with increased stiffness, dystonia, tremors, stereotypic thing, bruxism, all of that. And we've converted them into a model here into the figure. And based on the colors you can see here, so if it's blue, that is the pathway that is being mediated by glutamatergic pathway. And if it's to do with this gray one here, that is basically to do with a cholinergic pathway. GABAergic is the yellow, and so on. But what this means is that we have worked in detail about what pathways need to be modulated with what kind of abnormal movements in Rett syndrome, and because we knew that people would probably be reluctant to accept our views because we are not neurologists, we actually got professor of neurology as part of the team. And here, so it's Professor Narducci, who's actually the European lead on abnormal movements. So we've included him, and he he's part of the group, so that it's not just simply our team. We've included him because we wanted the world expert in the field of abnormal movements to be part of this. And in fact, we did the first draft and sent it through to him, and he actually wrote back to us to say that actually he was really astonished because he could find very few things that he could actually add value to it, but actually supported everything. And then final draft was done, and then we've submitted. So this is including, he is the lead for the abnormal movement consortium in Europe. So therefore, we feel confident in terms of what we've achieved with this. And this again means that every area that I showed you in the first few slides where it was to do with the dystonia and so on and so forth, we've actually gone through one by one, the autonomic, the emotional, behavioral, dystonia, seizures, each one of them we've targeted, identified it, and I think we've actually, the team has contributed to better understanding of these phenomena in Rett syndrome because of how we've addressed it. So these are just a list of research papers and so on. And this is to say how we've been using the data across the thing so that we can actually use it for automated triaging. As I was telling you, if the 2-minute questionnaire was completed by the parent about distress, about what they're experiencing, and that triggers an automatic email to the psychologist will contact you. So it means it's automated triaging as to who are the ones who need to be contacted more or less. That allows us to do that. Then there's actually an automated patient clinician matching that's possible, because based on, let's say, there's something to do with, let's say, abnormal movements as such, then we can choose who is the best person in the team to actually address that alongside thing when we're doing the approaching the patient as such. So we can actually match that. And then, of course, where the variables, you can get information from there. You can do automated risk stratification, as I've told you. And then I've shown you the structured medication review, and periodic data-driven risk stratification can be done for the patients. And of course, we can also get feedback from the families, and we can change if there's something that needs to be done. So this whole thing as such allows us to data mine for research, and can improve quality as such of what we do, and improve clinical care. But most importantly, this data that we collect would help us to be able to identify who might be the best candidate for which molecule or which kind of trial, so that we can get the best for the patient population. Rather than just simply randomly saying everything, and then we know that a particular drug might actually increase seizure frequency in vulnerable population. There's no point in us, pretending that that doesn't happen. We could identify the subgroup who do not have that as a risk factor, but have all the other things which are there, and then, expose them to the trial first. And after that, if we find that things are safe, then we can go on to the next level of risk. So that it's not that anyone will be excluded, but it's to do with who gets exposed to it first, so that we can learn from it and we can actually keep the patient safe. So that's the thing about it. And also the other aspect of this is that we can then plan to do remote decentralized clinical trial for existing repurpose molecules without patients having to come into the hospital and coming to the trial center and everything and getting bloods done and everything, because we can do it remotely. So if we knew who should get, so for example, if there was a probiotic trial to be done, we could easily do that because we know who are the ones who've got gastrointestinal problems, and that's where we are trying to focus on it. And therefore we can identify the patients, and then we could do that remotely if we got access to the drug. So to conclude, what I wanted to say here was that data is the most important thing for us. Participating and doing the things that I've outlined will help us to be able to participate and get people to participate in trials. And so, for example, we'd be able to look at who are the patients who need an appointment with a cardiologist, or who are the patients who may need an appointment with a spinal surgeon, who are the patients who might need a more careful review with a neurologist. So those kind of things, it's multi-specialty, but we'll actually be able to get to understand families and patients' needs and then respond accordingly. And all of these, I think, are in effect transformational and innovative, because we are the only center doing all of this at the moment. And I think it would be a good thing. And the last thing I would say is that the kind of clinical trials we're talking about can be from a repurposed molecule where we can just do it remotely, the whole trial can be done remotely, to the extreme end where it could be a gene therapy trial we're talking about. And again, so you've got the ability to look at who is going to be whether someone would actually be able to meet the criteria needed for a trial to be contacted, whatever it is to do with data gathering. And so my plea is that for families to register themselves on this on the health tracker system, and then to complete the questionnaires at your pace. And as I said, we will make sure that there'll be 2 questionnaires left there, 1 5-minute questionnaire, 1 2-minute questionnaire, where 1 for the symptoms for the patient, 1 for the symptoms of the family, so that we will automate the system so that it can actually trigger the emails to the right source, to either the physicians or to the psychologists, so that you can get the help that you need in real time. So that is what I thought I would focus on and explain how in real terms we can change and use data to get care improved to everyone. And that data then allows us to be able to recruit into clinical trials and also help reduce the likelihood of trials failing.
Well, thank you, Professor Santosh. That's been really interesting. And I don't think it hurts to re-emphasize the point that the data is so critical, both on an individual level and how you make decisions for particular patients, but also on the group level. And all of the publications that have come out of the center to date have been reliant on the data that's been gathered through Health Tracker and through the wearables. And so it really is important. And obviously the quality of it expands the more patients that are being monitored, but also it's a window into clinical trials. So I think one thing that would be helpful is to explain that typically for clinical trials, in the light of what you were saying about strategizing patients for clinical trials, most of the time, if people want to participate in a trial, certainly for Rett syndrome in the UK, what we've done so far is done requests for expressions of interest from our registry. But typically people will go to the doctor that's running the trial, or to whoever it is that's brokering it, like in this case, Reverse Rett, and say, I'm interested in participating. And then they'll be asked a series of questions that are based on the criteria for inclusion and exclusion criteria for that trial. That's it. So you can see the benefit, not just to the individual, but to the broader group, especially in Rett syndrome, where we have this issue with everyone having a different baseline, makes it very different to run effective clinical trials. And that's, I think, potentially why because we have the issue around the variable baseline, and then we have the issue of how improvements are measured in clinical trials in Rett syndrome.
Absolutely.
We really could use as much information as possible about patients physiologically and their own baseline over time before they go into a clinical trial. But also, as Professor Santosh was saying, so that you can make sure that the safe, the clinical trials are happening with the patients that are at the least risk first. So I did have a question coming out of that. I'll tell you what my main question was. When's the 5-minute questionnaire coming out? Because I have for a long time been going, this questionnaire, it's quite long, the normal REST questionnaire. To be honest, over time, it's become much easier to complete.
No, this is just it's there. I'll make sure that it is, reset. As far as I know, anyone who goes into Health Tracker, you'll always have this questionnaire. It's just called REST Weekly. And so it's just simply a list of those items, and you just have to tick what's there as such. So it's not complicated at all. It will take literally 5 minutes at best, because we are not talking about all of the items. We're only talking about the items that we found when doing the research as to what can shift across time. And we've actually included items which are relevant to do with COVID. So to do with fever and breathlessness and so on, so that that then triggers a thing. So we've set a different threshold for breathlessness in Rett syndrome versus in the non-Rett syndrome population, so that the trigger for the patients, the rest of my patients, is set at 2, while for Rett syndrome it's set at 6. And so that is the kind of thing we're talking about, having to actually develop algorithms which is more specific to the condition, that actually allows us to then look at it and see. So, and to actually plan how we can manage it. And the other aspect of it is that outcome measures in Rett syndrome is, the available outcome measures are terrible. And I think despite the companies in different trials claiming otherwise, I think they're now slowly having to eat humble pie, because they realize that the existing scales don't do much. So and what we have proposed as an alternative is, which is what the NIHR has done, has asked us to do for another trial, because childhood schizophrenia in children under 18 is an extremely rare condition. Just like Rett syndrome, it's very, very rare. So for that, when we are actually having to do, I'm part of a clinical trial, we're doing clozapine in those children. What the NIHR has decided is that because each center will only be able to recruit 3 or 4 patients of that in a year, actually getting each site to do the outcome measurement might actually just make it useless, because the variability will be so much. So what we've done is that...
Sorry, I'm going to switch it off. I'm going to take it.
So what we've done is we've actually, developed a core group in our team who then does the ratings for the primary ratings in all the sites. There are 36 sites. We do it remotely and blinded, so via Teams or Zoom, so that it's just 4 people doing the ratings for all patients. So we are using exactly the same things, and we've got the inter-rater reliability, which then means that the variability drops. And when the variability reduces, you've got a much better chance of either identifying whether the molecule really works or not. Because at the moment, as things are done in Rett syndrome, it is almost mathematically impossible to be able to detect change properly when there are so few numbers being recruited from each site. And so if there are 5 patients being recruited in Manchester, 3 patients in Cardiff, and 2 patients in somewhere else, and each of the people who are assessing and doing the ratings are a research nurse who has no experience in Rett. Another one is actually a consultant, or the third one is a neurologist or a psychiatrist. So it's a very, very the experience is very different. And so what we feel is that actually we have suggested it even to the Anavex group, that we feel that it is the right way to do, that we actually will form a core group here in our team in the center who will do it blinded. So we won't know whether someone's on the drug or anything like that. But the visits, when they have to do their primary outcomes, we could do it remotely, so that there is that element is removed, and we know that we do it correctly, as opposed to having to train others to do things and so on. So, and we've also suggested that as a surrogate secondary marker to be using the scale that we've developed, the REST questionnaire, in the trial as a secondary outcome, so that we can see how it matches to the other questionnaires that they want to use, which the FDA currently suggests they use. So these are the things that I think as a center we can do and contribute to improving clinical trials in general.
Can I just add in, Professor Santosh, that I just to add a little bit more perspective there as well about variability. I think it's even more important than ever that you have that solid, stable measure of people's baseline across the board when they're coming into the clinical trial. Because one thing we realized from doing the recruitment in particular for Anavex is that the parents themselves, let me put it a different way. We as parents, a lot of the time we normalize things that have become problematic, that we've just got used to. And so we don't score people. We don't score our children as necessarily at the level of problem as they are with something. And so when you're doing this kind of pre-screening over the phone with somebody, they're almost in, a lot of the time parents are almost in denial, especially Rett parents. I feel maybe you could shed some light on whether it's like that with the diseases, but I think because with Rett syndrome we've got this very insidious kind of progression. Sometimes it creeps up on you and you don't really realize. And so I really agree with what you're saying about that variability and the fact that we need to have a solid base for doing these baseline assessments. One question I wanted to ask as well was, maybe I'll contextualize it a little bit. So in the early 2000s, when Amber had been diagnosed, I think probably around 2005, 2006, I did take part in the British Isles Rett syndrome survey, which people who have older children will remember was a thing on paper that, you wrote on, old school. And then you sent it. I remember spending hours one time at the kitchen table doing it and crying and putting all our experience into that and then sending it away. And I think it's helpful to highlight when we're talking about participation in clinical research, sometimes people nowadays might think, unless it's a clinical trial, I'm not really getting anything out of it, because what's it contributing? But I think you can see from what Professor Santosh has been saying about how the data can inform how to treat the particular patient, i.e. your individual child. It can also tell us a great deal about Rett syndrome at a group level, and it can also, there's information about the best patients and the safest patients to put into clinical trials. And I just wonder, Professor Santosh, if you've got any comment on how in our such a short space of time, not even in our space of 15 or so years, things have gone from a paper questionnaire to the kind of thing that you're dealing with now, and how much more beneficial that is to patients.
I mean, to be honest, it's it's really very, very different, because we can actually use the data in real time and actually act on it. And unfortunately, despite everything that's going on, I think the system, the health tracker, is probably much more advanced in doing it than most other things. So for example, anyone who's been participating in the Anavex trial, they use a thing called ePro, and that's nothing like this, and it's not as intuitive or anything as such. And there's been issues in terms of stability. There have been lots of different things as such. But the issue is that everything will have some teething difficulties, and then it'll be sorted out. But what I'm saying is that when it comes to getting data in a simple manner, and what is useful is that as a clinician, you can use the output as I've shown you as a clinician. So it means that this can be used by the clinician to see, actually, hang on, why is this happening? And then questioning it. So in terms of the medication choice, if you find that two antidepressants doing the anti-epileptics doing the same thing in the brain have led to the same side effect, you learn from that and say, hang on, if I want to choose a third anti-epileptic agent, I shouldn't choose one which works on this molecule. I should choose another one which works on a different pathway, because that is what you can learn from actually doing a systematic review, which is not what is typically done at all. And so there is that thing, and I'm sure people have read the article in The Guardian last Tuesday or something, that 10% of all prescriptions in the NHS currently are useless or unnecessary. It's to do, and that would have saved billions. So we're not talking about small amounts here. So 1 in 10 drugs that are being used may not be necessary. And so unless someone actually targets and looks at it and explores to see whether that particular medicine is necessary, is it doing something that is supposed to be doing, is there any side effect, and evaluating it properly, I think we're not doing a good service for the patients, because we might be with the best will in the world, we might be continuing a medicine that's not doing much good and is actually doing harm, which we have not really looked at, because the person is the patient's not being able to tell us that X, Y, or Z is happening to them. So I think that's the other context of how relevant it is when it comes to identifying and capturing information. And this is especially important because we are now starting to collect the information from pharmacogenomics, so that we can actually look to see whether the experience being reported by families and the medicines that are actually not doing good to the patient is what would have been predicted by the genetic makeup. Because the pharmacogenomics only has to be done once in your life. So we could actually look to see what has happened. Could we have predicted it with the pharmacogenomics? And if that's the case, then we could actually improve prescription practices using that strategy. So these are all things that we are in a unique situation where we have got data about what has happened when certain medicines were used. So rather than it being just prospective, we get it and then we are waiting and then we're doing it, we would never know whether the information obtained from the pharmacogenomics is truly going to do anything more than what would have been done by an experienced clinician. And what we have is that the data about what has already happened. So we have all of that data, and that then means that when we get the pharmacogenomics, we can see, is that what the pharmacogenomics would have predicted? And if that is the case, then how much of the prediction is true from the has happened as would have been predicted by the thing, and then to identify which pathways are most reliable in Rett syndrome for prediction using from the report. So that.
How many patients are doing the
pharmacogenomics at the moment? I think we've got around 25. 28 patients, I think, from with Rett syndrome.
But see, that gives everybody a sense of how you start these things and how the group coming together suddenly gives you the information that you need to help everybody else. And I think that's the epitome of what you're doing at the SIP Rett Centre. So it isn't just a question of, oh, we've got all these questionnaires to fill in. It's these questionnaires, the data that comes from us and that adds to everyone else's, shines a light for everybody else, basically, especially for people in the country who don't have access to the SIP Rett Centre or aren't able to fill questionnaires in and all that kind of thing. There's a lot of people who don't have.
And again, those are the kinds of things, Rachel, in terms of the extending of the the center funding and so on, is to actually look at digitally disadvantaged group, whether we can actually have a half-time of a person who can actually then, it just needs to be someone who's literate to be able to help complete questionnaires on the phone for them, and so that they can actually, they can still participate, and they should not, it shouldn't, digital health techniques should not increase, sort of digital poverty should not make things worse for individuals who are already disadvantaged. So we have to really think about it carefully and look at it. It could be to do with, social, whether they understand how to use a computer, whether it's to do with money in terms of not being able to actually have access to a quick, internet kind of thing scenario. There could be lots of different reasons for it, but I think having some dedicated hours of time of someone in the center who can actually assist families to be able to do that and to complete it, so that they can also participate in everything that the center offers, I think will have to be added to the next layer, because the first thing was to actually manage it and to prove that it can be done. And now I think it's to actually improve it further.
That's really great.
Right.
Does anybody have, sorry, Beth, go ahead.
I was going to ask the same thing. I guess, does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask Professor Santosh about anything they've heard, or anything they wanted to ask about that they maybe haven't heard, that they had questions about?
Yeah, anything. I'm happy to answer any questions, whatever. Yeah,
I feel like Natalia's got a question.
I'm just going to
Yes, it's a bit weird because you look like the sun's behind you setting, and then suddenly you got the sun in your eyes.
I know.
I was going to ask a question, which is just how many patients there at King's are you looking at having for the Anavex children's trial?
At the moment, we are going to be looking at between 5 and 7, because at the moment that is what I think we should do. I'm also looking at it from the perspective of science. We've got a limited number of patients in the country. We have to utilize the patient groups for the right questions and the right trials. And because of the experience with the adults group already, I have raised issues there, and I am going to ask them for clarity and clarification. And one of it is very clear that, without there being a centralized blinded rating by experts, I don't think we are going to get very far. So I have raised that with them, and I'm waiting for them to, discuss with us. And if they agree to that, then it would be, even if it is just to do with 5 to 7 patients at our site, we would be the ones who are actually doing the ratings across all sites. So that would be, I would think that would be the best scenario to get the best out of the whole thing, because then you've got experts who know how to do the rating to get it done and will reduce variability, and we can then truly find out whether it makes a difference or not, as such. So that is the thing. So I'm just waiting for the company to come back to us about it, and I haven't heard from them yet.
Because I think it's also fair to say that, part of the benefit of having sort of centralized funding for the Rett Centre is that you're not in the position that many clinicians are in, which is that they have to kind of keep taking clinical trials, even if they don't really think they're a good idea, because they need to have a way of keeping good people in place.
Yeah, exactly.
So it stabilizes. I know it's not, it stabilizes the team, really, doesn't it?
Exactly. And also it's to do with being able to, we have been very clear in our feedback, and for people who know me enough will know that the only thing that motivates me is about patient care, and the rest of it is, and science of course, but the rest of it doesn't really matter to me in terms of, the funding and so on. Yes, we will find funding from somewhere, but the fact is that ultimately it's the patients that matter. And so usually companies find that it's much more difficult to get me to do things which than others. I will only do something if I feel that it is actually the right thing to do. I would not change, I would not budge. So therefore, I think that also is another aspect of it when it comes to things. So when new units are recruited who do not have much experience in Rett syndrome, and they're actually participating in trials, and it's being done by someone who may have only seen 5 patients in their life to do a thing, it's a lot easier for companies to push them around, to be able to ask the question, are you sure? Why is this? How is that? Explain this, explain that. That can't happen with me. my team. So we would not accept any of that. So from our perspective, we push back and we do it. And the only thing that guides us is science and patient care. And that, I think, is the only, probably the best advert for the center is that. Because for us, nothing else matters. Because it is truly, and what we're doing is trying to come up with solutions that even the companies have not come up with. So this central expert panel to do the ratings is what we came up with, because we've already got it done on another trial, while the companies don't know about it, and they are now, initially they said they can't consider it, but now when they started looking at it and realizing that the ratings are all over the place, then now they're willing to consider it, but I have no idea what will happen. So those are all things which I think are very specific to our side, our center. And I think that's the other reason why I think when it comes to the gene therapy trial as well, after having had multiple conversations with us, they have sent us all the documents to make us the only site in Europe. So for the gene therapy trial. So it's still not signed. I'm not saying that it is, but we are in the process of going through the whole process of, so we've had conversations yesterday. I met up with the trials, clinical trials unit, and because for gene therapy, we need to have a whole team of anesthetists, neurosurgeons, operation theaters, beds, all of those things. So all of those things are already, I'm in communication with the team to identify all the things that are needed. And it so happens, and I can't reveal the thing because it's confidential, but it so happens that there's another condition where a gene therapy trial is going to start in the same place. So we are trying to link up with the other team so that we can actually share resources, because it's another condition completely, but it's gene therapy for another condition. So we are trying to link up and make the best of everything. So, but at this point in time, I cannot say that it's definitely going to happen. Simply that we've been told we are the only site here, so we are in the process of getting everything done, and we have to submit a GMO for things and so on. So there are things, but the processes are going on, but it'll take time.
Well, that's all put everybody in a good mood for you.
Yes. Everyone was watching each other with little
I
smirks.
mean, that's just a dream as far as I'm concerned.
Yes.
So just,
may I please ask something? Because there's some bits I understand, but some not too much, even sort of in relation to Anavex. Because Professor Santosh, you mentioned you may only have about 5 people on the site.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just thinking, because the age range is so big, so from 5 till 17, and as we know, all children are so different. I'm just wondering, and if they also assuming there's someone will be on placebo and someone will be on the actual medication. So say out of these 5 people, will it be representative data that you can expect to collect in terms of how is affecting? Will that be enough data to even make up?
No, the thing is that it's multi-center trial. Ours will only be one site. And what I'm saying is that the numbers, it'll be done in multiple countries as well, and it'll be we are just one of the sites for
so
that.
It will be combined and
everything will be combined and to be able to answer the question. But the reason why I do not want to say that we will have 20 patients around the site and so on is because of past experience. I want to commit to what we can definitely do. And also the fact is that I don't think we should just focus on one molecule for everything, because there are multiple molecules that will come through the thing, and we need to have an open mind to be able to look at different molecules, because we can't predict what might work or not, but we contribute to everything, and we try and improve. My purpose is to improve what is going to be done so that we can actually get the results proper with fewer patients that need to be exposed to something before we have the results. And that's why I'm asking it, demanding that we come up with techniques where we can reduce variability, we can actually look at things and so on.
In a way, that's a better contribution for your site to make to the overall success of the Anavex trial than for you to take many.
Just simply looking at
For the Ceres-10 trial, I think
Yeah.
you had 26 patients.
Yeah, exactly.
And
And that
originally it started a low number, but the problem is if once the company sees that we recruit really well in the UK, then they put pressure on the trial site, in Professor Santosh in particular, because they know they do a very efficient job and really look after patients. Then they keep wanting to put more and more on, but then don't necessarily increase the resource level. So it's about you also setting your boundaries clinically.
Absolutely, because there's no point in, we are a team who are providing the, doing the research part of the trial as well as providing the care. And what most people don't understand is that in no other site would they take on the person's care long term just because they participate in a trial. And while that is not the case in the center, you can get into the center and be part of the center with or without participating in the trial. But if you're participating in the trial, we automatically provide the option that we will help with managing the patient long term.
And I need to say, they did that before they had any proper funding, because that's just the level of commitment of your team, Professor Santosh.
And can I just mention something else? It's maybe somewhat random and perhaps it's more will be down to the funding or something. I was watching this webinar about the ketamine trial, and what they've come up with, I believe they've got like some new device that they've sort of started using in terms of tracking how a person is feeling. It's almost like sort of a body suit or some sort of like body gillet. It's sort of like your watch that you have, but something that they can wear easily and that picks up on a long-term data without obviously.
They're all variables. Variables come in different forms. So you can have, for the Ceres-10 trial, the variable was actually a chest band.
Oh, right. So we do.
And so you have now sports people don't have to wear watches. They can wear they're actually, it's present. The sensors are in the t-shirt itself, so that you can wear it and you don't have to have a separate one, because that then sends all the things. So it's just, they're all variables. They're all different kinds of thing, but they're sensor based. The quality of the sensors is what we're interested in. And the issue is that most of these ones, which are actually to do with wearing it as a cloth or, as a garment, the quality is not medical grade for us to be able to use for the thing. That is the reason. So what we're looking at is, and one is to do with medical grade. The second is that how often is the sensor collecting the data? So for example, we are interested in getting data as frequently as possible in terms of milliseconds, while sometimes you get data being collected every 6 minutes. And then they fill the gaps in with an algorithm which they are predicting this might be it, but that may not be the true data. And so therefore, from our point of view, when we're having to look at that, we need to identify the variables that actually give us the data that we need in actual data, as opposed to imputed data, which they have, sort of guessed that it might be that, but actual capture is different. And so all of that is what we are spending time doing as a team, to be able to identify the right device, the right wearable with the right scientific quality for it.
Also, can I just make a point that one of the things I found interesting when we've looked at some of the proposed protocol for different upcoming Rett syndrome trials, I think it's interesting that they look at using all these different wearables, about which there have been no Rett syndrome specific publications at all, when with the wearable that's being used by the SIP Rett Center, there's been a large number of publications about it showing. Do you want to comment on that, Professor Santosh?
Yeah, I mean, because we've spent so much time, whenever a new wearable comes into the market, I end up using my research fund, what I have from another thing. I get Federico and Leighton to buy the device, and then we actually test it out on just adults, normal adults, or so-called normal adults, and then check and see whether we can actually pick up what it's supposed to pick up. And we actually compare it against gold standards that we have. And so until and unless it actually can do what it says on the tin, the way it's done, then only we actually get the data from other people, so from patient populations. And a lot of the time, 90% of the time, they don't meet the threshold that allows us to feel confident that we can use that particular device in the patient population we're dealing with. So that is really the reason. And the other thing is that the most of the devices that are done, they allow the data to be, they use an algorithm and then calculate it, and they allow the data to sit on a phone that the person has. But that data, then they don't allow us to actually extract it for analysis. So therefore, when you have those kind of things, then it's actually practically useless. There's no point in the data being collected and it's sitting on an iPhone, in each person's iPhone, but we don't have, as a clinician, have access to that data in real time to be able to make the kind of decisions that we have to make. So therefore, there are all these different things which are involved in it. And so all I would say is that this is part and parcel of what we're doing regularly. And we've, so for example, we've identified a new device where we are hoping we'd be able to utilize that for setting up heart rate variability, so that it has to be worn on the arm or in the upper part of the thing, not in the wrist, but upper part of the arm. And that we can get the dial to change color based on whether they're actually becoming in the heart rate's going too high or not. So that people, even though the child can't report it, if it goes red, then people can act on it, try and help child, de-escalate the situation, get the child to feel calmer, use distracting techniques, all of those things. So we are currently testing that out to see whether that works. And if that does, then we will be, that would be another thing that we would be wanting to do, and then trying to suggest that would be a good thing to be used, while we can then set the threshold at an individual level based on the research device. So we'll know each one at what level we have to set it, and then we could ask for that device to be set at that number, and then we could then start looking at how we can do it. And then that would be when I think non-medication strategies might actually do quite well, because the first time you'd be able to know when to do something rather than interpreting when behavior, which is usually when it's too late. The heart rate might change much before the person gets distressed enough for it to be demonstrated.
That's really interesting. I mean, because some of the young people and children and adults have outward signs that they're becoming distressed, but some don't.
Yeah, and even the ones who do have the outward signs, it might actually be happening after 5 minutes of the changes in the heart rate, so that even what you're seeing might actually be too late. So if the physiology is changing beforehand, you could actually do something to prevent it to get to that state when they're actually distressed. So that's what we are suggesting that we could attempt to do, so that if someone, someone's actually getting very distressed, that we can see. But if on the other hand, before the actual distress is displayed, if the physiology is changing and we actually have an ability to show it, then we could actually preempt the distress from happening by actually doing something that it might be that the child can get distracted by just watching a few video clips or something like that, or something that is positive, which could then help de-escalate the situation before the distress becomes more. So this is hypothesis at this time, but we are hoping we can actually test it out and see. And then the other thing, of course, is to see whether we should be testing things like the TNS, trigeminal nerve stimulation. TNS is not a medication, but it's actually, you put it onto the head and it actually does vagal or trigeminal nerve stimulation to help change physiological thing output. So there are.
I'm really interested that you've said that, because in a more basic sense, I was thinking, there's a lot of kind of woohoo stuff about, controlling your own autonomic system and for health and trying to calm yourself down and everything. And how the vagus nerve is implicated in that. And I was thinking, a lot of people have a vagal nerve stimulator for
epilepsy or other things. Yeah.
Well, would that, please can you explain, just, I know it's a bit of an offside, but could that in some way?
That is exactly what we're already exploring in the team today. We're discussing we're having discussions around it. I'm one of the investigators for a trial on TNS in ADHD. So it's been funded by the NIHR. It's a 2 million project where we're asking children with ADHD to wear a device at night, which actually provides the stimulation. And it is so, and the trial is looking at real versus sham. So half of them are having the same device, but they only get one thing, and then they don't have the stimulation taking place through the night. And so it's only to be worn at night when they're asleep, and then when they wake up. And so the trial is looking at whether that can change ADHD symptomatology and whether the symptoms can get better without using a medicine. And so that's funded by the NIHR, and I'm one of
surely there's even more of an argument to use it in Rett syndrome, where we know that people are basically blowing themselves into.
No, but that is true, and that is where we are currently in the process of looking at which device might best suit the group of patients, and then it's a question of where we get the funding for it from. That's the thing. But that again is a trial. That's a clinical trial. We have to then link up with the company. We have to make sure we can get the sham so that we can, like a placebo, so that we can prove that it actually works or not, and so on. So that is a thing. But as you can see, despite the fact that it's a center and so on, we've got very few people, and so doing everything is difficult. But at the same time, we are hoping that we can get some. If we can get some funding to do some more of these researching, because we now have a clear idea as to what are the kinds of things that are going to matter, what are the kinds of things we have to do if we want to get it right for this group of patients. Because even as a team, we've learned quite a lot. And so now no longer are we talking about things at random. We are focusing on what we think would think, and that's why we've actually come up with this question, and to see whether we can actually
potentially you can start with the small group in it, and as typical with the center, it can be somebody, say, whose autonomic dysregulation then causes them to have serious seizures or other adverse events. And so I think, my overwhelming feeling from this, and it's not news to me, but my overwhelming feeling has been, there's no shortage of innovation and ideas about what else you can do. No. But you need people to participate.
Yes. and funding to get get the people to be able to do it, because we are limited in terms of what we can do. And also the other thing is that when we as a team, we respond as quickly as we can when there is a need for a patient. I think many families will vouch for that, and a lot of the time we are having to have very difficult conversations with other specialists. It's not just in the area as such. So I don't think there's a single week that goes by where I'm not having a conversation with another specialist about things that might have to be changed from what they are doing. And we are now working on trying to understand whether we can, using the watch, whether we can differentiate whether it's a dystonia or whether it's epilepsy. So we are working on things which, we've got data which suggests that we can actually, because the movement is in 3 dimensions as opposed to 2 dimensions, and spasms, it might be 2 dimensions. So we come up with different things of trying to look at how we can work out that. And that if we could come up with something like that, even if we can get a 60 to 70% chance of being able to say this or that by just looking at a watch reading, I think that would be brilliant, because a lot of the questions that I face with families at the moment is they don't know whether it is autonomic, whether it is a dystonia, whether it is seizure, and all of those things. Even the neurologists are in exactly the same position. So in fact, most of them are wanting to know what we are doing and asking us about it. So it's.
I think that the one slide that you showed that kind of clearly demonstrated what the areas are that the center can really help with is really useful, especially because what you were saying about having to have these difficult conversations with other clinicians. It must be difficult, I know, within the medical world, there's kind of a, people don't tread on each other's
Of
toes.
course, of course.
But you've had to break through that for Rett syndrome.
Yeah, I mean, I've had to, because otherwise I wouldn't get anywhere. Because the most of the time, as I keep saying, it's how you package medical information. That's what makes the difference. Every family knows their child well. They know this happens, that happens, but what they don't know is what information should be put together so that when you're presenting to a, let's say, a gastroenterologist, you know, if it's reflux, it actually said this happens, but this also happens, that also happens. So it's actually trying to put the right kind of information together, and so that when you package the information appropriately, the specialist then responds. Because the specialist otherwise just is listening to what is happening, and they just think, oh, this is Rett syndrome, that's it, and then there's nothing that happens about it. And so a lot of our work currently is about literally repackaging medical information and providing and skilling up families to be able to use medical information appropriately, so that when they're contacting the different professionals, different experts, they can present information in the right manner, which then means that those professionals will have to act, as opposed to it being just random discussions about this or that.
So really the data in this sort of holistic view of the center really helps to unpack the complexities of Rett syndrome and can inform what these other clinicians are doing. Exactly. And enhance it rather than it Absolutely. Being separate.
And we are not at all trying to take over from other people or anything like that. All we are doing is trying to help families get the right help from the right experts, when it's necessary, rather than it being on a waiting list for 2 years down the line or anything like that. It's actually trying to get something done when needed is the most difficult thing. And that is where I think we spend a lot of the time.
But the importance is that you recognize the urgency of that, and you also recognize in a different way to, I think, what many people will have experienced, that a lot of the elements of Rett syndrome are things that can be managed with existing medications, and we shouldn't ever just consign things to the Rett syndrome box. Absolutely.
And also just simply say, oh, because they've got Rett syndrome, they can't be in pain, or they can't be this, or they can't be that. And actually that's, professionals being also discriminating because of disability, so without realizing it. So from my perspective, the way I approach it is that they deserve the same thing as everyone else, you and me, and therefore we have to facilitate that from that happening. So it can't be that because someone's got a disability or of whatever kind and they cannot express themselves, that therefore they get substandard care. And the other part of it is individuals who don't know enough about Rett syndrome, often assuming that everything can be explained under Rett syndrome, and so therefore they don't need to act. So those are the two barriers that is constantly the issue that I have to deal with. And it's something that happens not just with Rett syndrome, it's with almost all the rare diseases that I have to deal with, because it's the same phenomenon, because people are not, clinicians or professionals are not very confident because they've seen 2 cases in their life. So they, so they assume that this might be what it is. And so they're not doing it purposely, but unless information is provided in a fashion that actually say, okay, someone's having a seizure, they've ended up with this, their SATs are falling even after the seizure's ended. What does that imply? How should we be dealing with that? And so on. And then if those questions are asked like that, then suddenly then they have to say, okay, hang on, are you sure that it's dropping after the seizure is finished? And they'll say, yes, I have got, here's the recording, this is what it was, this is the thing. So then they'll say, okay, hang on, that means we have to investigate, we have to do any urgent EEG for that. But if that information is not packaged in that fashion, and you just say that there was a seizure and the thing, they'll say, okay, fine, yes, you need an EEG, you've got a 6-month waiting list for that. So it's that sort of thing, which it's to do with how the information is actually provided so that they can make decisions which are most appropriate. And no one, the families don't know that this information that they've got has got so much value and importance from a medical perspective. And the clinician, on the other hand, for whatever reason, doesn't have that information. And so they assume what has been said is what it is, and it's at the end of it. And so our role has increasingly become being able to listen to everything and then repackaging it and saying, hang on, when you get to the neurologist, make sure you say this, this, this. This is what the SATS was before. After 3 minutes, the seizure finished and the patient went to sleep. However, during that period when we were looking at the thing, the SATS is continuously going down and went down to 40, went down to 86. And therefore, tell us, do we have to do something about it? What is it? Now, if that second part of the information was not provided to the neurologist is not going to act. The neurologist is going to act as if the seizures ended at 3 minutes, and that is what, and it's appropriate because that's the information and that's the information they have. But if the family is informed that this information is vital and you need to present it in this fashion and then ask these questions to the thing, then the same neurologist will have a different response.
Mm.
And so
But it's such a lot. Sorry, go on, Beth.
I was going to just say, I think it sounds to me like we're going to need some future sessions on training us parents in repackaging the information, because I do think that you are really, until the centre and the health checklist came along, everything was very in boxes, and they never joined together. And I think we're very conditioned to think anything that has to do with the heart, you talk to the cardiologist, and you never really are trained or even thought to think about how these things impact each other. And therefore you have to present the whole situation. And also the professionals, in my experience and the families that I've talked to, the professionals don't speak to each other. And really the centre is the first place that's done that, but it still takes I think we all need training and actually thinking about how we present information to professionals.
Absolutely. And I think one of the ways we can do that is that in the next 6 months, I'm hoping, because again, it's to do with limited time that we have for research at the moment, because it's Jay, it's me, we all are up to our eyeballs with doing things, is that I want to convert all of our findings from the reviews, systematic reviews that we've done, because it's all, we've managed to put it into pictorial things as such, whether it's to do with the risk factors for sudden death, risk factors for autonomic dysregulation, risk factors to do with, in terms of dystonia. All of those things are there in those things, but we want to convert them into a simple questionnaire that could then be done contributed partially by families, partially by clinicians, so that we can get that information available, which then will help repackage information appropriately. Because those are all the stratified risk that we are talking about, which we've actually already published on. And so therefore we can actually do that, and then we can give families that here is the thing print out, or here is the thing, so you can actually take this with you and say, these are all the things that are there, and so that you can have that as an aid memoir to when you're doing your, when you're discussing with the right specialist. But that's the next phase of doing this. But again, as with everything, one of the things that I'm sure that I've always been told is that I'm never short of ideas and innovation. The problem is the lack of time to be able to do everything, and funding for it. But
you still managed to achieve like 1,000,000% more than most people. So I think that's the thing, isn't it? People who have lots of ideas and try lots of things and even fail sometimes, get stuff done. So I've always loved being involved with you because of that element of your personality, Professor Santosh. You always keep it interesting. There's always some new thing that you're looking at that I could never have even thought of. I'm very aware that we've now got to 3:30 and we've had a very full, mind-blowing session. It's been really interesting. But I know we have to let you go off to do all the other things that you have to do. So all I want to say is thank you so much for your time today. And
thank you very much, Professor Santosh.
Really,
we need to clone you so you have a double.
Are you trying to teach everything you know to these the clinicians in your group?
I am, and more than that, we are also planning to sort of develop almost like a textbook kind of thing to deal with Rett syndrome. So we are in the process, but all of this takes time. But we've got standardized practices, and as I said, for example, for me, it is ultimately how quickly can I produce shifts for patients, not a publication. A publication is important, but actually, if, for example, if I can even get a 70% chance of being able to predict whether something is dystonia or an epilepsy, that will be hugely advantageous, because it doesn't need lots of things to be done, because it'll just be a watch thing, and then it's actually using an algorithm to be able to differentiate that, and then that could then be worked with the neurologist to be able to help them decide whether they want to.
That's so brilliant. So no more Rett episodes.
So that's really what I'm saying. So it's, for me, everything is, whatever we learn from science, whatever it is, I want to translate it and see whether we can actually find a method by which we can actually make a difference to the patient, who's ultimately what we are all here for, to make the best for the individual.
And so that's the take-home message, really, is, participating in clinical research might sound like some boring abstract thing, but actually what it does is it brings about these shifts for patients that come into our lives and actually make a difference for the people that we're caring for. So thank you, Professor Santosh, for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
And for being here today. And we are running another session on Monday at 11 a.m. and that is about nutrition and blended diet in particular. We had a lot of questions about that on the recent reflux panel that we did. And that's a parent panel of people sharing their experiences. So we hope that people watching today or later on will check that out. And thank you very much to everyone for being here.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Professor
Bye-bye.
Santosh. Take care.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.